Hey everybody, welcome back to the Paddle Pursuit. I am here today, Joel Pekosz, who is joining us all the way from Massachusetts, down here in Florida, in the studio, right here with us today. So real long drive. We're really happy to have Joel here with us. Joel, fortunately or unfortunately, is most popular for the viral clip of getting hit by the OC6 at Chattajack in the surf ski. Joel is a super high-level paddler in his area. He may not say it, but he wins 90% of the events that are in his area, probably more than 90%. I don't know, actually. Glenn was saying, I think it's 100%. Super high-level, starting very recently, making the progression and, being part of the community at a high level in a quick fashion. Right. So again, unfortunate that the OC6 thing is the most popular thing, but we're going to use that as clickbait to get you guys watching today. Joel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity.
So Joel, tell me about your history and leading into paddle sports. So I don't know very much about you, right? So kind of fill us in and myself.
Like you were just saying, I'm relatively new to the sport. I'm just starting my 5th season in paddling. I have been an athlete essentially my entire life. Starting 4th grade, I think I started playing soccer. And then in 7th grade, I started running, and continued doing both, all the way through middle school and high school. While I was in high school, I pretty much wanted to do everything. I bounced. Soccer and cross country were both fall sports, and I alternated both of those throughout high school. I swam and dove in the winter, and I wrestled one year, and then I ran track and field all 4 years. So, and then after high school, I went into the military, and then I continued playing soccer in the military and running. I ran on a 10-mile team in the Army, and I got hurt while I was in the Army. I had a bad concussion. I hurt my knee, and then I didn't do anything. I was pretty sedentary for about 19 years, and I was a truck driver after I got out of the Army, and then I got really big. I was like 260 pounds. And it got to the point where I was, I couldn't even like go up the stairs and bend over to take my boots off. And I was like, got a little tired of talking about achievements I used to do, and I needed to make a lifestyle change. So, first thing I did, I also had like an alcohol problem. So I quit drinking and, made some changes to my diet and lost a little bit of weight so I could start running again. So I lost like 20 pounds, started running. So this was when I was like 38. I'm 46 now. So that was my entry back into sports. And yeah, so I think 38 to maybe 42, I just, was all running. And I worked for a running store. And back where we live, there's a popular triathlon called the Josh Billings, and my boss at the running store was an Ironman that would win the triathlon every year, and it was a paddle triathlon instead of a swim, and so he won it probably like 5 years in a row, I think. I'm like, I got to give this guy a run for his money, but he was a faster runner than me, and I'm like, I got to get an edge somewhere. So I'm like, if I learn how to paddle, maybe I can do a little bit better than him in that aspect, and that would be my edge. So I went out and I bought a Stellar SEI Gen 2.
Mm-hmm.
And my first experience in that, I got in the boat, and a couple of my friends were like, "Oh, that's too tippy. You can't buy that." I got in the boat and I paddled it straight out into the middle of the lake and flipped it. And I was like, "Oh, now what do I do?" So I had no idea how to get back in it. So I swam it to shore and got back in, and I was able to paddle back around the lake. And I went back home and I watched a YouTube video like how to remount back in the ski. And then I went back out the next day and got in the boat. And this time I was a little smarter and stayed close to the shoreline.
Right.
And when I fell out, I did the remount and got right back in and continued paddling. And fell out, paddle, fell out, paddle, and yeah. So then COVID happened, and I was never able to race my boss, and he retired from racing. And but I fell in love with the paddle. I love being on the water, and I took that entire year of just trying to learn how to paddle. I had that boat, and a few months later, I bought a Fenn Spark.
Wow.
And started paddling that. And then kept paddling. Then next year in the spring, I bought a V12. And then I did my first race in the spring, which was a wonderful experience. They had to stop the start of the race because I couldn't stay up in the boat. And I had to go to shore and start from shore. And it was paddle, 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 flip, paddle, 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 flip. So, and then 2 years after that, I won the race. So, it's just put that drive in and, continued to grow. So.
Yeah, that's it's really cool. With Danny Smith, I think he's episode 6. We talk about tapping into the running community, right? And that was one thing that he was talking about is triathlons, and you switch out the swim, which is the scariest portion, and one of the reasons most people shy away from a triathlon, and replace it with the paddle aspect, right? And then you get this built-in optimization of if I'm in a plastic kayak, I'm not as fast as fiberglass. And you tap into all of these people that kind of get to dip their toes in understanding in the progression of kayaks into surf skis and so on, right? So it's really cool that that's actually kind of a segue of your transition into the sport. And there's many other paddlers, especially in the kind of the Northeast region, because of those triathlons having the paddle aspect, right? Cold water, can't put the athletes in the water. You can put them on top of the water though, right? And so there's a few other people that I've met that have had that transition. In Florida, for example, the water's warm enough that they force the swim, so they don't have that paddle dynamic built in, so you don't get that same segue. But because there's hundreds of thousands of triathletes across America, right? And there's only thousands of paddlers, right? So if you're able to kind of bring those two together, it increases the participation in the sport. So looking at your surf ski transition, right? So getting an SEI, what led to getting a high level intermediate boat? Because that boat is right on the line of intermediate and advanced, right? So how did you end up with it?
So my boss that I spoke of, he paddled the V8. So I needed a faster boat.
Yeah. So it instantly became an arms race of yours is 21 inches, mine's 18.1.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and then going into the Spark, right? So the Spark is another pretty big jump from the SEI. So what was the transition from the the intermediate boat into the truly advanced boats with the V12 and the Spark?
The Spark, the first day was horrible. It was I couldn't even sit in it. I was just flip, 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 and I remember I was outside. I was out in front of like a lakeside restaurant, and I was so embarrassed. I'm just sitting out there, and it's I would sit in the boat and maybe get a paddle stroke and flip, and it was just get back in the boat, and I couldn't even sit in it. But then I'm a determined person, and I'd go back out there the next day, and then I would get like 5 paddle strokes, and just stick to it, and then by the end of the week I was able to go a little bit around the lake and remount, and I would break it down to how many flips I would do every lap around the lake, and then eventually I would be only doing 5 flips around the lake, and then eventually I was doing 1 flip around the lake,
Mhm.
and then eventually I was doing 2 laps with only 1 flip, so you know
Yeah, having the as they say, the grit and the resolve, everybody pays the swim tax, right? Like that's kind of like the showcase word from Sirkovich as he is on, is everybody pays the swim tax, right? And we pay it in one way or the other. And so it's interesting. There's always the hard route if we try to expedite the process and get to getting into those elite boats. You're swimming, right?
yeah.
And a lot of the community today tries to funnel paddlers into the V8 and then other 20-inch wide boats and then slowly progress them through, right? But there is something to be said that there many people that stick with surf ski in particular, they want to go through the hard route, right? They want it to be difficult. They want to pay the swim tax. They want it to be this like rite of passage. And you don't want to let this idea beat you, right? Where it's like, I got to get in, I got to figure this out, I can conquer it, etc., right? And there's a lot to be said for that mentality for many of the athletes that are within the sport. Many of them started, myself as well, my first boat is going to be a Stellar SCS, and you get it, and it's just like, holy crap, I made a mistake, right?
Right.
And but that resolve and that grit kind of gets you to the other side where you can now paddle it without much issue, right? And then the transition from stability into technique is able to kind of reveal itself. So talk to us about, you did your first race, and then you came back 2 years later, won the event. Talk us through some of the racing within your region in specific, right? I think a lot of the viewers of this are kind of on the west coast of the U.S. and then the southeast of the U.S. So we're not really familiar with that northeast territory. So kind of walk us through some of your experiences in the race scene, getting into it, and kind of progressing through it.
So in Western Massachusetts, and the racing scene is the NECKRA community. So the Northeast Canoe, Kayak Racing Association. And for me last year, my big goal was to win the NECKRA series. And I wanted to win it undefeated, and first place undefeated. So that was my big A goal for last year. And also dip my toes into a couple larger national races, and that brought me down to the Chattajack. And then some ocean racing a little bit too, which I didn't really get that much, but I go to Canada every year too to do the downwind race up in Quebec, which is amazing. Awesome community up there. Highly recommend that. But yeah, so it's a great community. The NECKRA association, they're great folks. I have to laugh a little bit because I think a lot of them haven't really accepted kayakers. But especially somebody new like me, I'm still trying to learn all the rules of how people paddle and things like that. So a lot of races I end up getting yelled at when I'm trying to pass people, and I feel like I'm getting like purposely flipped over and stuff. So I don't know. It's just trying to learn the rules of the land, the hard way.
So looking at NECKRA, how many people would you say estimation are part of NECKRA or go to your typical race? Like, what is the participation number?
Any typical race, you're probably looking at um, probably looking between 40 and 60 racers
Mhm.
in all disciplines.
Right.
Yeah.
And what kind of racing formats? So, what are the kind of distances? Is it flat water? Do you go up and down rivers? What are some of the environments that you guys are paddling in?
It's mixed. So, it could be a river, up and down river, or a lake. Um, and distances will vary from 6 miles to 12 miles usually.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't think we've really anything over 12 miles.
So, kind of explain some of the kayakers versus the canoe paddlers, right? So, kind of walk us through some of that dynamic for our viewers, right? So, the marathon canoe is something that we haven't really talked about too much on the show. Some people know what it is. Many of the paddlers are more ocean adept, right? Outrigger canoe, surf ski, stand up paddle, prone paddling. And then the marathon canoe is like this like Batmobile looking thing with the wings on the side, right?
Right.
And I do want to have Kevin Olson on the show, who is a resident in Florida, who is from the Michigan region that they swear they are born and die in the marathon canoe. It's like a religion, right?
Yeah.
But kind of walk us through some of that friction of kayak versus canoe within NECKRA racing.
Like I was saying, I think some of the older canoe folks just haven't accepted the double blade yet, and it's just a little bit of not ready to make a change, but for me, it's hard to um being new, trying to get through, not knowing the rules or the unwritten rules, and learning the hard way about how racers um, uh, handle the course.
Mhm.
Yeah, I get yelled at a lot.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I can say in contrast in Florida, I have had one of the experiences with learning from people that have taken the time to teach me, right? So if
Right.
I've goofed up on a race course or the etiquette wasn't correct or something, right? Or there was some strategy that would give me a benefit, somebody has always taken the time to share it with me, right?
Oh,
And that's
yeah.
one of the things with the club that I run, the online school, when I get emails or whatever it is, right? Somebody spent time to give me that information. So it's very nice to spend the time to give that next person that piece of information, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the way that you don't share that is by being like angry or rude or dismissive or trying to like force somebody out of the sport, right? Like if you diminish their enthusiasm to attend these events, they don't show up and the sport kind of circles the drain a little bit, right?
Right.
So trying to get this outreach and grow communities and sports is just taking people that if they don't know something, just teach them, right?
Right.
And then they know forever. And if there's another person, they can hand the torch off and keep that going.
For
So
sure.
from your experiences, if you were to fix something in that, what would it be? Like if you had something that you could change about bringing canoe and kayak hand in hand and, given the olive branch, what would be something from your vantage point that would help solve and remedy some of that friction?
Communication is key.
Mhm.
Open and honest communication, and we're all a community, and you know and trying each other's discipline also, don't be afraid to say, hey, let me try your boat,
Mhm.
and that goes for me too. I've never been in a canoe, so I need to put my rear end in a canoe and OC1 and paddleboard. I've never done it, so
Yeah, and I think that helps kind of bridge the gap on understanding, right? Like when you take the reins of something that's different, right? It's a two-way street, right? Like so if you're paddling marathon canoe your whole life, like understanding the tippiness of an elite level surf ski, how the rudder operates, the limitations of the rudder. If you don't use one, you might think that the thing can turn 360 degrees instantly, and it can't. It only turns a little bit sometimes, right?
Right.
And so, again, and it just extends this understanding, right? So, like when things are happening, if you understand the vessel that's next to you, right, it gives you a little bit of empathy to be, more open with your communication. So that perfectly segues into talking about Chattajack and the OC6, right? So before we hand it off to your experience, the OC6, this is a great point, right? Because it's just like the marathon canoe that we're talking about here, right? Where most paddlers at Chattajack, one, have never seen an OC6, and two, have never been in one, and three, have never steered one, right? So there's this fundamental misunderstanding of how that boat operates. And then the OC6s have likely never paddled in traffic before, right? So like when we take our boat out, we're on a lake and there's nothing you can hit except lily pads, right? And we have to force ourselves to get close to each other with these boats to navigate around them. So when you go to Chattajack, you have 500 small boats, right? A lot of these steersmen have no concept of making little adjustments to, weave around. And so again, that fundamental misunderstanding of the limitations of each boat leads to these cataclysmic events, right? So walk us through your Chattajack experience, right? So it's first time doing the event, lining up on the start line, progressing down the race course.
Like you said, I had never seen an OC6 ever before. I didn't even know it existed. And the first time I saw one rolling down on a trailer, I was like, what is that thing? Like it looked like a tank.
Yep.
I was in the Army and I was like, is that thing built for battle?
Yeah. Yep.
And then there was like, what was there? 30 of them?
Yeah, it was between 20 and 30 that line, because I think the original start list had like 35 and they couldn't get enough boats. So a lot of those teams couldn't make it, but it was over 20 boats on the start line.
So I mean, it's pretty awesome. I think it was a pretty awesome sight. Starting through the race, my start was actually pretty smooth. I had an OC2 off to my right where I had a little bump and go traffic getting through, but I made it out and headed down river, and I think I started hitting the first start traffic around maybe 8 miles or something like that. And I'm working my way around paddle boarders and the prone paddlers and just trying to stay on my line, and also trying to one of the rules was to not draft the OC6s,
right?
And which is really hard,
absolutely,
because they're everywhere. And when you have one in the middle and then one over here, and you're trying to stay on your line, but then you have somebody that you're trying to go around, and all of a sudden you're in somebody's draft, and then you're like, oh, I don't want to get in trouble. So then you're trying. It's really hard. So, I think so. I was a little over 10 miles when this happened, and I was a little off center to the left. I was just paddling straight. I think a little bit before that, I made a maneuver around a sup paddler, and then I saw the boat come off to my right for the first time, and they made a maneuver. They were way over off to my right. And then that was a few minutes before it happened. And then I pulled ahead, and then they came up again, and as they were pulling ahead of me, they were still probably at least 10 feet away from me. They pulled into a sup traffic,
right?
So they had to back off, and their attempt to go around them led them into coming into me. So I looked to my right and was like, they completely scared me. I was like, oh my God, what's going on? And as I tried to make an evasive move,
Mhm.
I flipped my boat
Mhm.
and I went under. They went right over me. Their ama went right over my boat. And when I was trying to remount, I remounted. Um, One of the things that um, I did, so I've never paddled a distance like this before.
Mhm.
The longest I've ever paddled was probably 3 hours. A hard lesson that I learned was how to run my hydration line. So I put my camelback on the back of my boat underneath my rigging.
Mhm.
Um, so when I remounted, I was sitting on my hydration line and I was trying to get everything rerouted. And then I got hit by another wake
Mhm.
while I was off balance and I flipped again. So I was then tangled in my hydration line and my leg leash, and I was, just it was a hot mess.
Mhm.
So um I looked back on the video, I was probably around 5 minutes of trying to get untangled and I remounted a couple times, and long story short, I ended up losing my bite valve.
Mhm.
And after that I was like, I'm not going to go another 22 miles with no hydration. um Never paddling a distance like that.
Mhm.
I'm the type of person that I would rather paddle tomorrow safely rather than suffer through today and be messed up for an entire week.
Mhm.
Like, there's always tomorrow, you know, rather than grinding something out and being, I've done that before, and it's not a pretty thing, you
Mhm.
know. Um, I've learned my lesson.
Yeah, so the preparedness, because that's not something that everybody plans for. Is we plan for the paddle, not for the flip, right?
Right.
And so that's a great point. So with the OC6, so watching the OC6 video, right? This is like with the OC6, when you don't paddle in traffic, you want to give everybody a lot of space, right? And sometimes that works, but in many situations, there's not enough space. So that steersman turns his head to the right and he gives the sup paddlers on his right a lot of clearance, right? And in a more high confidence situation, he could have ran much closer to them, right? So as he's looking at him, he gives them like 15 feet and is like, oh, yeah, that's clear. That's when that freaking AMA gets super close to you, right?
Right.
And so, having that fundamental issue where, the steersmen are not prepared for weaving through thousands of opportunities and situations, and do I want to hit that guy or this guy? Can I make it through here? Do I have to go around? There's so many little decisions, right? And it's like a butterfly effect, right? Because that inevitably, you flip, it leads to hydration issues, and then your race ended, right?
Yeah.
And so at the end of the race, I saw you at the dock, and I'm like, holy crap, you finished really fast. Because I was like, oh yeah, me and my OC2 partner, like, we killed it, right? And I was like, holy crap. And you're like, nah, like something happened. But your demeanor led to no like form of animosity, or like I would have been furious at that moment, right? So kind of walk us through. So like you have to come to the conclusion, live to fight another day, right? Which is an excellent, smart decision. If you lose your water, don't paddle 20 miles in the freaking, Tennessee heat. Kind of walk us through some of the mentality after relegating the race, getting done, still going to the finish line, still going to the award ceremony, right? So kind of walk us through keeping a positive mentality.
That's just how I live my life.
Mm.
If you're going to be negative about little things, it's how people are going to look at you, how your family, especially if you have children,
Mm.
are going to end up growing up. It's important for me to just stay positive in any. Yes, I was upset. Yes, I was disappointed. But in the long of and short of things, I actually made a friend out of it. And you can't look down on things. It was an experience, and you have to learn from those things, and you have to what's the takeaway? What can I do better next time? Was it 100% their fault, or where's there's a line somewhere. I just need to go a little bit faster.
Yeah, so that is very, very deep and very insightful. I think that's awesome, right? And I'm not gonna lie, like I wouldn't have that positivity, but it's something to strive for, right? Like talking about NECKRA, including people, all of that is positivity, right? And like sharing that and embodying that, I think is really important for the sport in general, because there are a lot of situations that are inherently negative, right? So facing that with a level of positivity goes a long way. So back up, right? So
that being said, also, I do think maybe the event can make some small changes too.
So that's what we're segueing into. So insight into the event. So give us NECKRA, 40, 60 people, USCA, lots of people at the national level. Give us some insight into starting at Chattajack, right? Having all those people on the start, right? Like it's pretty neat, right? So give us some of your opinion on that, and your opinion on, after having a cataclysmic race-ending event happen from potentially poor staging of all these boats, right? What would be your opinion on trying to fix or trying to relegate the situation after your experiences?
Well, I mean, obviously, they are way more experienced than I am in an event like this. So, I mean, take my advice as a grain of salt, but I mean, the OC6s, if there's going to be that many, they definitely have to start in a different wave. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I think whether they have to go first or they go last, and maybe that's the answer. I don't know, maybe last is the answer, because they are a fast vessel, and they have an opportunity to make up time, and then that still gives, that doesn't change many other aspects of the race too, and the timing that it took for them to get into the water, was a big delay for everybody else, so they can eat that time after everybody else started also.
And I think this year was a good test run for the organizers to get a feel for how fast these boats can go. So you have the unlimited boats, right? Which is the size of a school bus, right? It's the same length, right? And it only weighs 150 pounds for the hull. So you can take two dudes and lift up a school bus length vessel, right? But they also make a spec boat, which is the one we have here in Hernando, which is 400 pounds, and it's shaped like a brick, right? So those vessels don't go quite as fast as the Carbon Unlimiteds, right? But the answer was, or the question was answered this year, with many of those crews still finished at around 6 hours, right? So like you said, there's plenty of time to meet that 8 and a half hour quota, even with the equipment disadvantage. The Unlimiteds, man, some of them finish in under near 4 hours, right? So their speed potential is super high. But the spec boats, I think that was what they were trying to figure out, is if we delay these boats specifically too long, they might not reach this cutoff. And I think this year answered that for the logistics. And like you said, having them go last, having them go first, there's enough of them to make the start interesting. In years past, the year that I steered OC6, there was 4 boats, right? So integrating that wasn't a big deal because there's not that many. When you have a whole freaking armada of them, it changes the equation quite a bit, and enough where if they went first or last, the race is still interesting, right? If they started our four boats in its own wave, it wouldn't be fun because it's just, in the first 20 minutes how it's going to shake out, give or take, right? Versus, having this dynamic, you have to, navigate these other boats, or you have so many other boats. Again, it makes it much more interesting. So tell us about starting on the start line, having all these different vessels and stuff. What was it like being at your first paddle carnival at Chattajack?
I had never been in a race with, such magnitude. So, it was very exciting. And especially the way they do the start. I love that because you're just like, it's building up, and it's just like, you're just holding that paddle and you're just like waiting and you're waiting. I love that build up. Some people are like, come on, just start the race. But I'm just like, it's that feeling of just like, your heart's beating and then all of a sudden that gun goes and then it's just, water's going everywhere. And it was very exciting, I absolutely loved it and I can't wait to give it another go. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's one of the small aspects, or it's one of the contributing aspects, I should say, that makes that event so memorable, right? So you have a memorable start. For many racers, there's so many racers that there's something that goes down the race course that, they remember for life. Some are much less dramatic than the one that you're going to carry, right? But for many people, I was next to this guy for 5 hours and we battled back and forth, right? And it builds these memories. And like you said, it motivates people to take, that step and do it again. And it's really viewed as like the Boston Marathon. Like it's the big event for, hundreds of people. And I think they've really done a good job in kind of snowballing it. The after party race, is excellent. All the buildup before the event, right? They have all kinds of demos and, boat showcase. The check-in process is kind of a circus, right? Where you have all these people. You can meet people that, oh, yeah, I know you from Facebook, and now you're here, and we can chit-chat, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, coming together, really adds to the fun of it. And I'm really glad to hear that you're planning on going back and, doing it again. So so in your area, how far is it from you to the Atlantic Ocean?
It's about 2.5, 3 hours.
How many races are in the NECKRA net that take place in the ocean or choppy water? Probably none because it's marathon canoe.
Yeah, there isn't any, but there's another community of paddling that's New England Surf Ski, which is put on by Wesley Eccles and Tim Dwyer. A couple of really wonderful guys. And that's a really awesome community. And that's oh God, I'm trying to think here. I can't remember, but yeah. So a lot of their races are either like the Blackburn Challenge, which is I think Cape Ann rowing or something. But either it's like tidal rivers or like right around ocean. So I think they have one that's coming up soon in the Narrow River in Rhode Island. So that's kicks off their season. So and some of them are free, so which is great, yeah, it's a lot of fun to be able to get out there and get out there with those guys and battle.
The one of the showcases of the paddle pursuit is bringing all of the communities to a common ground, right? Ocean racers, sprint racers, marathon racers, flatwater racers, single blade, double blade, standing, kneeling, laying, whatever it is, right? And I always like to take time to try and spotlight the opposite of what somebody does, right? So Circovich, we were talking about the ability and access to the ocean is greater than the reward, right? in his area, there's no races that take place with choppy water or, super choppy water, ocean elements. So there's no reason to allocate all this effort to getting good at it if your geography doesn't dictate that you have to be good at it. In Florida, one of the reasons we have to get good at a little bit of everything is there might be a race in the Atlantic Ocean. The Chris Park race yesterday is on Canal, so it's totally flat water. So being good at both is almost like two different swords that you have to sharpen, right? So kind of speak to some of the ocean events that you've done and any of the challenges that you've had in trying to master those conditions in a short period of time.
Right. Geez, my first ocean race, I did down in Connecticut. I think it was Westport, maybe. I went out with the Stellar SCA, and it was a beautiful day when I got there. It was flat, and I brought two boats with me. I brought the SCA and I brought the SCI with me.
Gotcha.
And maybe like 5 minutes or 10 minutes before the race the wind started picking up, and the parking lot was on the other side of the road from the beach, and I was like, oh, I don't want to go get the other boat.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm gonna tough it out.
Sure.
That was another situation of where I needed to change my mindset, because once this race started, it was like maybe like a 4-mile triangle out into the ocean.
Sure, yeah.
So the first leg was all side chop from the waves coming in, right? I probably made it like 15 feet before my first flip. And I knew at that point that it was going to be a long, long day.
Right.
So I was like, I just had to change my mindset from racing to this is just going to be a learning experience, and I'm just going to paddle and, work on my stability and figure out what's going on here. And because that was not the right boat for me to use. This was a few years ago to be using in these conditions, because it got pretty gnarly out there. And it was supposed to be 2 laps, and for that first lap, I flipped at least 30 times.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
And it was a point where a safety boat was like, "You want us to take you in? Come on, we're gonna take you in." And I'm like, no, I got this. And so I would have done the second lap, but I didn't want to put them through that torture of watching me.
Right.
Yeah. And it was brutal. But yeah, that was my first experience in the ocean racing. But it was a fun memory.
Yeah, for many that first race is always tough if you haven't had a ton of time in the ocean, and it's geography, right?
Right.
If you live 5 minutes from the ocean, you paddle in every day. After 100 days, you're kind of an expert. But if you can only get there a few times a year, it's hard to kind of piece together all that experience that's needed for it. It's funny you mentioned the course is a triangle, which is like the most difficult in those conditions. I have a friend in Naples named James, and one of his workouts he does in the Gulf is he calls it sloppy square. So when it's super windy, you go out and you try to make a perfect square on your GPS, right? So you go down a quarter mile, half mile, over half mile, and try to do all those right angles. And it's sloppy squares because the more conditions you have, the more squiggly lines you have as you go around.
For sure.
But it's a great way to go out and like practice, dealing with side chop, headwind, tailwind, and the opposite side chop all in one go. So having a race course that forces you to deal with all of that, right, is super tough. As opposed to if you have the wind direction, you go straight into the wind turn and straight downwind, right? Then it makes it much simpler because you only have to deal with side chop for a moment on your turn, right?
Right.
So having the triangle, that's like super torture. So in the beginning, I kind of glazed over. So in your area, you are super close to Stellar HQ, right?
Right.
So kind of talk about the relationship with Stellar in your area. Your first boat is an SCI. Is that by chance? Did you know Dave Thomas over at Stellar? Kind of walk us through some of that.
So I didn't know Dave at the time when I bought the SCI. That was by chance. I was shopping around, and I I was looking on Marketplace, and I broke it down. I was either going to buy the SEI or SES, and I was going to go with the SES, and I had an appointment to go meet with the person, and I'm grateful that I didn't buy that boat.
Yeah.
Because and thankfully, when I had that appointment, the seller had sold it to somebody else already, and so I bought. I met with the person for the SEI, and I was like, I don't even know how to paddle this. Can you take it out and show me that it floats? His name's Steven. We still chat once in a while, and he's a great guy. And he's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll paddle it around, and and he came back, and it was a beautiful boat. It was actually one of the Stellar reps boats.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. Prior to him, so so I said, yeah, I'll buy it. And then that was the day that I brought it home, brought it in the water. And but yeah, at that point, I still didn't, I didn't know Dave. Stellar is sold by an outdoors store in Lenox called the Arcadian Shop.
Gotcha.
So, and I know a few of the guys there, and they were looking for somebody at the time to kind of help, obviously promote the brand. So this was, a couple years after I was already into paddling and already into racing and things like that. So that's how I got my foot into the door with Stellar. I ended up meeting Dave at one of he puts on the Great River Challenge. And that's how I met him. And yeah, I mean, that was kind of how that worked. I ended up working at the Arcadian Shop. And then now, Dave's one of my best friends, and yeah, that's kind of a short story, but
yeah, it's super cool having the geographical hub for a brand and that connection with the paddlers and the community. In Florida, the Flying Fish stand-up paddle boards are manufactured in Jupiter. They have a blossoming, huge sub-community hand in hand with that geographical location of the manufacturer, right? So it's always cool to kind of spotlight, when a central hub is located here and you have paddlers that are all closely in that area, right? It goes hand in hand, like you said. It builds, having racers that participate in races, right, is an important distinction in getting the product out there, but just keeping up with the times, right? Because paddling changes over time, and if companies lose sight of where the market is going, what their customers are doing, and what their customers want, you lose them, right? And you might lose them to other brands, you might lose them to other sports, and so keeping people in paddling, I think that's a very important distinction in general. And so it's great to hear that Stellar's actively working, to do that in their area. So tell me about some of the goals for the future. And you had mentioned the MR340. So episode 9, we got John Radford on here, who is a staple in the MR340. He's done it, I think, 3 or 4 times in the pedal division, right? So kind of walk us through some of the goals that you have, including the MR340.
Let's see. So I'm currently in school. I'm doing my getting my certification to be a physical fitness trainer and nutritionist. Nutrition is something that I'm very passionate about. And obviously, physical fitness also. But and then as far as racing, running, I've always loved the endurance spectrum of it. Like I've only run one marathon, but I've trained for quite a few. And they just never ended up working out because of an injury or of something of that nature.
Mhm.
I really love training long distances.
Mhm.
So I actually watched the Epic Winter Clinic with
Mhm.
Sally
Yeah.
and about the MR340. And I met Sally.
I was about to say she was there yesterday at
Yeah,
the
I
race.
met
Yeah,
her.
yeah.
Yeah, so that was really awesome to get to meet her, and that inspired me to want to do the race.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I used to be a truck driver. I used to sit in a truck for 50 hours.
Mhm.
I'm like, if I can do that, if I can sit in a truck and plow roads for that long, I think I can sit in a boat. you know, so
Yeah, it's one of the things we talk about with the MR340 is many of the successful solo racers are powered by willpower and grit, but they're not powered by technique necessarily, right? So
right,
many of those guys like LeCave, right? Awesome documentary on the 340 if you look it up on YouTube. And but he even says, right, like he's like, yeah, my technique's not that great, right? But he's a big dude, right? So he kind of overcomes some of that with physicality, but it's all driven by willpower.
right,
So when you can integrate the idea of high willpower, high grit, and technique, you get somebody like Sally O'Donnell who goes out there and does very well. And if you look at Sally, you wouldn't assume like, oh, she's going to crush all these super fit young guys, right?
right.
And that's the thing that propels her forward is that technique aspect, right?
Yeah.
So you're in an interesting position where you're embodying many of these ideas to do something special at the MR340. There's a lot of people that the distance scares them off, but they have the physical potential to do it, the technique, if they had the willpower, right? Sirkovich, he even mentioned like, oh yeah, I want to do the 340, and he's like, and then I changed my mind, right? But a guy like that would be so difficult to deal with if he had his mind in the right spot for it,
Oh,
right?
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, very cool goal. We're gonna have you back on the show to tell us about the MR340 and your in retrospect.
Yeah.
And but that pretty much starts to wrap us up. So, is there anything you'd like to say to the world at large, friends, family, paddling people? Any last thoughts?
Last thoughts. For the MR340, I work with Jesse,
Mhm.
and he's building a training program for me. So publicly, I'd like to say thank you to him because
And it's Jesse Lischuk.
yes,
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So and he's very busy, obviously, as we know, because he's getting ready for the time what are they called?
The Olympic trials.
Yep,
Yes. Olympic trials. Yep.
I was going to say time trials. I'm like,
Mhm.
that's not right. But in his busy schedule, he's still able to find time to, do the dot the I's and cross the T's, and so I'm very thankful for that. And
Awesome.
he's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, Jesse's one that I'm trying to get on the show when he's in Tampa. I'm trying to trick him to come up here. I had him literally in the area to paddle with me, but I didn't have the setup with the audio to bring him in the house and get him. And now he's in like California
Yeah,
right
he's in
now.
California right now.
So I had to time that, and it'll probably be retroactive to the Olympic trials, having him on the show. But it's awesome working with somebody at such a high level. And like you said, them taking the time to, in that right, it still propels the sport, right? Makes you better, makes you more
Right.
interested, right? And that's very important for the community at large.
Yeah. Yeah, and we wouldn't be anything without our loved ones either. So, my fiance Kendra, she's awesome. She's very supportive. So
Cool, my man. So that wraps us up for the paddle pursuit. That's Joel Pekosz from the Massachusetts area.
Picos.
Picos. Dude, oh my God. We've been pronouncing your name wrong forever. Picos. You should have told me that at the beginning. Crap.
Where's the hammer?
So what we're going to do is we're going to have the sound bite where I say Picos at the beginning. I'm going to put that in the start in my editing skills. Killer, my man. Thank you so much for coming down. That concludes the paddle pursuit. We will see you all next Monday with our next guest.
Cheers.
Excellent.